Well, good evening, everybody. I want to first thank everyone for coming this evening. I know this has been a long-anticipated meeting, so we are excited to at least talk to you about our draft transition plan tonight. I'm going to walk you through how we got to the draft transition plan. We're going to take input from you, and then we'll talk about our next steps going forward. Hopefully everybody can see the different presentations and have, if you have any questions, we're going to ask you to leave them to the end, and then we'll address them at that point. So my name is Carrie Conley. I am the ADA coordinator for Canton Township, and we have a team of people that are here who worked on this plan. We had a number of consultants who are not here, but also helped us get to this plan. So we had a self-evaluation done when we were here back in August of 2017. Accessology was here. They led us through the initial stages of that, and they were the ones who really guided us through most of this process. We had Spalding Detector, which is a consulting company, help us through the site assessment, and then we had AC3 Collaborative Architecture help us with the building assessment, the playgrounds. We have the Canton Township team, and obviously the community are the groups that put this thing together. So tonight we have with us, and I'll just introduce the people that are here. We have John Lefevre, Greg Holmberger, we have Bill Surchek. Yeah, I'll get, I'm sorry, Brad Sharp, Erica, and yeah, why did I get Eric? I'm sorry, I'm drawing a blank. Eric here tonight, and there were other people that are not here that have been instrumental in putting this together. So I do a big thank you to them because it's a lot of work that's gone behind the scenes to get to this point. So tonight, as I said, I just got through the introductions. We'll talk about the purpose, we'll talk about the federal requirements. Those were talked about previously, but I think it's important to go back over those so that everybody kind of knows what we're trying to accomplish. The self-evaluation process that we went through, the draft transition plan, next steps, and then we'll get to questions. So the purpose of the ADA transition plan really is to identify the deficiencies in Canton Township's policies, procedures, practices, and our physical assets, and you'll see that throughout the transition plan. It's also to provide us guidance to remove the accessibility barriers, which is obviously the key component of it. And it outlines the progress that we've actually taken. So while we haven't had the draft transition plan in place, it isn't that we haven't started to do the things, and it isn't that we haven't worked on them. So you'll see when it gets down to the types of projects that we have to do and the things that we're required to do in the plan going forward, may not be as large as some people might have envisioned because the township has continued to work on some of the deficiencies even while putting the plan together. The ADA transition plan is intended to be a roadmap. It's going to be a living document. It's not something that we're just putting in place today. We're going to sit on a shelf. It really is something that we will be working through, and we'll anticipate that we will add things to it as we come along. We will use what are called action logs, and if you looked at the draft transition plan, you'll see that it basically captured the various things that we needed to address, and we will continually update those, and you'll see how we'll present those back to the public and keep you apprised as to what we're doing along the way. As I said, it's just not going to sit on a shelf somewhere. The federal requirements, which I think most of you know, we have obviously to develop a grievance procedure, individually be designated, that is me, and we are to perform and retain a self-evaluation and transition plan. And really it is required to deal with our structural changes that need to be made. The other things that we're doing, the individuals with disabilities are not excluded. We want to make sure that our programs, our services, and our activities are open to everybody and that people are able to participate in our programs, but also freely maneuver around our facilities. So you'll see that a lot of the construction, if we need to alter the facilities to make them accessible, we have found that there are things that we do have to do, even though our building is relatively new. You get surprised about things that might not have been done when they constructed the buildings. Let's see, requires accessible features must be maintained in good condition. Obviously, if we're going to put the time and effort into making the improvements, we're dedicated to ensuring that we maintain them that way. And then it requires that interested parties have an opportunity to participate. We started this back in 17, as we talked about, and really had the opportunity then to listen to what people's concerns were, so we had an idea of where we might need to focus energy, and hopefully we have captured most of what's going on. What it wasn't intended to do, it's not required that every facility be barrier-free as long as there's access to the individual programs, activities, and services. So the transition plan itself, we identified, we identified obstacles that limited accessibility throughout our programs or activities with activities provided for individuals. We had looked at 38 different sites, and we'll talk a little bit about that. I don't know why that keeps going in and out, I'm sorry. And we'll show you the sites that we did look at, and you'll see obviously some costs that are associated with the improvements that need to take place on those sites. We looked at parks, we looked at buildings, we looked at the exterior sites surrounding our buildings. We identified the implementation plan, and we've developed the action logs. So, and we've identified the cost that is associated with each of the projects. So if we go back to the things that we were supposed to obtain and do internally, what happens is I am the ADA coordinator. We have an internal team of employees. We have designees from each department. They serve a couple of functions. One, if somebody is in need of something as it relates to an accommodation and they happen to be in a department, we want to make sure there's somebody there, a resource there, that knows how they might be able to assist. And then there are obviously things that have to happen potentially in other departments outside of mine, where there are designees that will actually facilitate some of the projects being constructed. And then the community team. So when we talk about the community team, it's the interested parties in the community to provide feedback, to be kind of a partner, eyes, ears, to assist us. So in this, we had the meeting back in 2017. Following that meeting, we did a survey for feedback. We put the draft plan for review, and we put that out on the website on the 21st of February. We posted it, let people know that that was available. It's a very lengthy document. In fact, I think this is more condensed than our original one. I think, Brad, it's probably, I don't know, close to 500 pages if you look at all the details that go behind it. So this really tried to capture it in a way that people could read it and follow it. Maybe not as much detail as we might need for constructing some of the things. We're here tonight with this public meeting to take input. It's important for us to know if we've missed anything or there are things that you haven't seen in that plan. And then what we'll do is we will take the input tonight, and we'll incorporate what we can into the plan, and then we'll look to going to the board as our next step. But the website, I know we have received a comment about the website. Our website is currently under a redesign. It will go live on June 1st, and you'll see a little bit more about that later in this presentation. And we will be asking tonight if there's anybody here who would like to be a part of that review team to actually go through it and test it with us. We'll ask that that be done in advance. Kristen Thomas is spearheading that. I thought she might be here tonight. She might pop in. But I do have a sign-up sheet for anybody that might be interested in that, and that'll help us make sure that we've reached all of those types of things as well. Anne-Marie, I'm sorry, I didn't introduce you back there. And then our intent is not, as I said, it's a living document, and we're quite happy that you hold us accountable to it. So our intent is to have biannual meetings. We will have them in the fall and then in the spring, and they're timed, I think, appropriately to make sure that our input is valuable and that we can have time to actually do some of the projects and then time to plan for the next ones. So some of the details of what we had to do and what the things that we did in our transition plan. So if you look at 3.1 of the transition plan, most of it is procedural or documentation or trying to make things more easily accessible. So we took a look at our website, because I think that's where a lot of the information is available, and tried to make sure that we improved it. So the ADA contact information is a little bit more visible. We did have a grievance procedure and an appeal process. We reviewed it, we've updated it. Reasonable accommodation request policy, procedure, and request form. We've developed it, it is online. When we developed it with the intent that it could easily be used to track, to hold, to make sure that we knew where the projects were as they came in, that they got distributed to the right people in the organization. So that is all, it's all online. Anybody who puts in a request, it comes to me. It gets distributed to the key people, it gets tracked, there's a log that's behind it. You don't see that, but from my standpoint, all of that exists so that we can easily track what needs to be done. I can make sure that people are getting it done and that we have a process that does that efficiently. So that is in place. We've tested it, it does work. So if anybody else, and I've seen it come through from residents as well. Some maybe unusual requests, but someone really wanted us to help them find housing. So I think it was a little bit different use, but that was an interesting request we got. Anyway, so the service animal guidance and reasonable accommodation, we have enhanced that policy. The retaliation or coercion policy has been posted. The non-discrimination clause, we had that. We've needed to make it more visible. Public notice statements, we've reviewed those. The existing ones were not out of line, so those were actually in good shape. The ADA assurance, or really some federal fund recipients, we don't get a ton of federal funding, but we needed to adopt that policy to ensure that we were in compliance should we receive federal funding. An alternate format policy, so while our website is not, while we were developing this, wasn't necessarily in compliance, and we've got years worth of data that is out there, we needed to figure out what that interim gap was going to be. So there was a starting point, so if you took January, anything prior to January of this year and you needed it in an alternate format, you can request that on our, through the request form online, and we would provide it in an alternate format for you. So we had to have some way of going forward and then also addressing documents that might not already be in compliance. We did the boards, commissions, and committees reviewed, and we'll develop training for each of them. We're anticipating we will do a video, maybe ambitious, but that's what our intent is so that all of our boards and commissions are also trained. And the website improvements, I'm going to go through a little bit more on that. I talked about the June 1st launch. And then the program eligibility requirements, these are more so related to the programs, and that's always going to be ongoing for people who need an accommodation, and a lot of times that's in our leisure services group, and I think we have a kind of a modified version for them so that they can make those accommodations as easily as they possibly can. And then the emergency management plan, the emergency management plan itself was being updated. We have had the emergency manager involved in our meetings, so he will be working on reviewing and incorporating, making that plan ADA compliant as well. So that is ongoing. It's not something that we newly hired him, probably in the last year, or maybe a year and a half. So that is definitely is into consideration as well. So the website update, we did revise it so that it would be more easily readable. We made sure that when you got on there, you could find it. I think that was one of the frustrations, is it was just buried somewhere. We created the electronic accommodations request form, so it does capture the information. It provides easier tracking for us, and it helps us to ensure that we have timely responses. We made sure that we worked to make sure that our site was compliant, that it has the screen reader capabilities. We've learned some things along the way. You know, your best intentions are that you've put everything in there and it works, and we've learned that sometimes how we put it in there and how we make it into a PDF file, or how we space it instead of using a tab, make a very big difference. So it's been a learning process for us, even internally, and so there'll still be training to our staff and people throughout the organization in order to make that work. And as I said, we have a new website launching on June 1st. And we will be looking for volunteers to help us review that before it does get launched. So on the website, we made sure that you could find where the ADA coordinator was, which we thought was a good idea. And you'll see that we've tried to make it pretty prominent. Obviously, the first thing that you'll see when you pull up most of the areas, if you go to the ADA coordinator site, and they'll all take you to this site. So if you go to the ADA, you'll end up on the ADA coordinator site. So you'll see that you can easily do the accommodations. My contact information is there. Our statements are there. We'll try to upload. We know that we're videotaping this. Someone has asked whether or not our PowerPoint presentation will be available. They were unable to be here tonight. We'll try and load those types of things on there so that we'll make it as available as possible and update it so it's just not sitting there as well. So getting into the transition plan, we did building reviews, as I indicated before. There were 38 different buildings and facilities we looked at. So there are 19 buildings listed here. We went out to evaluate them. The items that were evaluated including their entrances, could you get into the building from the outside? What about when you were inside? What were the interior routes? It included doors, hallways, public areas, employee areas, break rooms, drinking fountains, and public telephones. So that was certainly evaluated. If you've seen, if anybody ever tried to get in from our parking lot out this direction, we did not have doors that were easily able for someone to get in with a wheelchair. That has been changed. So that access is available from that parking lot. Not usually where most people may come in. They usually come in from the front door, but that certainly was not one that was easy to get in. It was a very heavy door at the time, too. So that has been changed even while we've been working on this transition plan. When we looked at the sites, they were ranked in a couple of ways. We looked at the building and property. Was it owned or was it leased? Is it ours? Is it a place that the public visits, or is it a storage area? Is it a polling location? Obviously, that's really important to us. And when it is a polling location, was it compliant? And then, is there employee activity that takes place there? So those were some of the things that were important to us, and we evaluated those when we went into this project. And then, when we look at projects, when they're constructed in priority, they're going to be in priority order, and then they'll be incorporated in our capital improvement plan. And you'll see when we look to have community input, they're scheduled so that we have the input before we go in to a planning session in for the capital improvement plan. So that's why they've been done that way. We gave them ratings. They were rated between high, medium, and low. So if you were a high priority, it was focused on access actually to the facility. That was our main focus when you got into a high priority, is making sure people could get to where they might want to be going. At the conclusion of, if we've concluded all of those priority ones, we would find that people would be able to enter our facilities and not have challenges with that. Priority 2 were access to services, programs, and activities. As I indicated, that will be an ongoing item for us. If we provide a new program or a new service, obviously we will always be open to listening and accommodating where we might be able to in those types of things. And then bathrooms, I think, fell under that second one as well. Low priority are really those that look at non-public spaces, things that were less of a priority for maybe more public, but maybe more so for areas that wouldn't have been seen quite as much by the public. Transition plan for parks. We reviewed 10 parks within the township, and it was a joint effort when we evaluated this one. So AC3 and Spalding to Decker. So AC3 would evaluate the park equipment and the play areas, and then you had Spalding to Decker looking at the site areas, which might be the parking lot, the access to some of those facilities. So that they really had to tag team on those two consultants in order to develop the plans for those. So they took they evaluated these basically to determine what the non-compliance was, and looked at the parks, the concessions, the restrooms, and site access. So those were the parks that were evaluated. Interior improvements, the general building improvements outlined in the plan include such things as ADA signage, the countertop heights, bathrooms, partitions. Some may not be as wide as they needed to be, sink accessibility, and then drinking fountains were also a part of those improvements that we need to do in this plan. I said other miscellaneous are probably just small and minor things that I didn't pull out on this one. These are the 29 buildings, much easier to see up there. 29 facilities that we talked about that we looked at, and their addresses, they were ranked in priority order of where we needed them to, where the changes needed to be done. The estimated costs are on the right-hand side, and those are without contingencies or without including a project manager on them. You'll see those costs get incorporated a little bit later. But this is, if you were to snapshot of what we looked at, this is the group of that we need to take care of. So the estimated cost, when we looked at it, as I said, we did the self-evaluation. We didn't include that in this cost because it's a cost that we've already incurred. The site assessment, which we talked about, those are the areas, could be the parking lot, the sites surrounding, maybe a physical building or a park. We had the building assessment, and those were the buildings that we talked about and the types of things that we prioritized, high, medium, and low. We did the playground assessment, and those costs all came to about $835,014. You add on a project with contingencies, and then you add the project management cost, which is about 10% annually. And those are today's dollars, so we know that the longer that we take to put them in place, the more that it will cost. We're also realistic in the context that you can only take on so many projects and be good at completing them as long as you have the resources to do it. So the total projected estimated cost right now is $1,194,000. One of the questions came up, and I've tried to take in the questions that I've gotten before I got here. What about signalized intersections? So it is mentioned in the plan, but unlike a city, the township doesn't have jurisdiction over our roads. So the roads typically fall, there are private roads, but if we're talking about mostly where you're going to find a signalized intersection, those roads are owned by Wayne County or the state of Michigan. So they are required to follow the same regulations that we are. I mean, the same federal regulation applies to them as it does to the township. So as far as it comes to signalized intersections, we obviously, as we're if we're building projects or we're in a cooperative partnership with the county or the state, we're interested in making sure that they're addressed and that we see those things happening, whether it be the intersections, whether we have an opportunity to install sidewalks in a GAP program that we don't already have because there's construction there. But it requires a couple of things from us. It requires funding, it requires the maintenance, but more importantly, it requires the right-of-way. And sometimes that is truly the most challenging part of doing some of those items, is that we don't have the jurisdiction and trying to get the right agency to give us jurisdiction to install something that they probably don't really care, but we do. Sometimes it's more challenging than the project itself. But it is something that we keep in mind as those projects come forward. And we keep that in mind too, is when subdivisions are developed and those types of things happen, they're obviously in the forefront of what we'd like to see. So maintenance versus alterations, and I thought this was important to share with people as far as what is a requirement. So while we don't have jurisdiction, when would the county or the state have to actually do something, and what would have to be done? So I think this next slide will show, I thought it was a little bit easier to show how something may need, if an alteration is being done, you have to put in the curb ramps, right? This next one shows maintenance versus alterations. So if we're out doing, if you see the county out doing crack sealing, or they're fixing the joints, or they're doing things like that that are typically classified as maintenance, there's no requirement for them to go and do the curb ramps. However, if they're constructing, if they're milling and filling, if they're doing something that is far more substantial, they are required to put in the curb ramps. So I think it's important to distinguish between, if we see people out there, and that's a lot of time you'll see, that there's someone's doing something on the roads. Depending on what they're doing will depend on what the requirements are for them to do it. So what about sidewalks? That's the next one we get. And it's mentioned in the transition plan, but we have a pretty comprehensive plan that people may or may not know about. So in 1998, the Michigan Supreme Court made sidewalks within the township the responsibility of townships. In 1999, the township actually passed a sidewalk ordinance, and it outlines the criteria to determine, what repairs need to be done and how to assess. And we started a program, actually. So in 1999 to 2013, we have a mechanism in which we go out and review the sidewalks in the platted subdivisions, and we've made repairs. The sidewalks that get assessed are sidewalks in the residential areas in the district, targeted geographical zones, and then we go out and look at complaints that come in that are either in or outside of those targeted zones. So it's important for us to let you know that that's an ongoing project, and I'll get to some of the costs that we actually spend on those things each year. And then we extended the project to include primary roads. So in addition to the sidewalk assessments, the township assesses pedestrian crossways in residential areas as well. So sidewalks are addressed as part of an annual sidewalk gap program, and it's conducted through our municipal services department. We look at, then inspect sidewalks within the public right-of-way and platted subdivisions and along main roads each year in targeted zones. The targeted zones, if you look on their website, you can see what those are. We also inspect sidewalks that are brought to our attention, and we've seen a lot of those that take place. And when someone brings them to our attention, it doesn't mean we'll necessarily have the opportunity to go out and construct it and fix it right then, because what happens is we've either got, depends on the season too, we're not going to go out and fix a sidewalk in the middle of winter. There is an optimal time to do those repairs. And we also try to do them when we've got a number of repairs going on, and that we'll identify and address those as a part of the plan. So I might get a concern that there's an area that needs to be addressed. It may not fall in until next year, and it might be because we're doing that particular subdivision or that area next year, and it flows in and it makes more sense. But it hasn't gone unnoticed, so sometimes people, I think, can get frustrated and say, well, it didn't get fixed today, and it's not that it won't get fixed, and we try not to push it too far out. We try to make sure that we can get to those things. But we annually budget the repair costs at about $500,000 for sidewalks. The inspection covers over 30 miles of sidewalk, and we repair about 5 miles a year. That's quite a lot of sidewalk. And we know there are gaps. We know that if you go out on Cherry Hill and you can go west, you will stop because there's a gap between there and Cherry Hill Village. We know that exists today, right? But we're mindful of that, and we also are mindful as things develop throughout the community that we're trying to make sure that we close some of those gaps. Again, right-of-way is always key to that. There are missing sidewalks, that's what I was just talking about, and that we've identified ways. So sometimes we'll get them, we know by going out there and inspecting them. We also know that they're brought to our attention by residents, and sometimes during the developments that are coming into place, and we have a coordinated effort. The nice thing is most of that is done through our municipal services department, so they coordinate. You've got engineering, building, and planning, the right people there working on those projects in order to make sure that we keep an eye out for those types of opportunities to close some of those gaps. And then in order to construct them, as I said before, securing the right-of-way, you got the design, the permit, and then constructing them. So they're not always, it's not just a simple thing, I'm going to go out and fix the sidewalk today. But if we're going to construct it, it has to be constructed with those things in mind. The transition plan, what's next? As we said tonight, we came here to solicit input, answer questions. As I said, I've got a nice team of people here that are here to answer any of the questions that I might not be able to answer. We'll take whatever input we get tonight. We will finalize a plan. We are then scheduled for April 16th to conduct a study session with our township board. And then we would request after that at their May 14th meeting, we would ask them to adopt the transition plan. And then the next item in order is the website launch, which we want to go into effect on June 1st. I think we had planned it, but it was going to be Memorial Day, so we thought that was probably not a good idea. So June 1st is our target, and we'd like the input from people before then. And then what we'll do on a regular basis, and we're going to start out the first year, first probably a couple of years, see how it goes, and that is to hold community meetings in the late fall, and we want to hold them in the spring. So we say that late fall gives us an opportunity to get through construction season during the summertime. It lets us get into the fall so we can wrap up some of those projects, be able to update people as to where we are, especially if they're happening on the outside of the building. If they're happening on the inside, it doesn't really necessarily matter timing. And then what really will happen is come spring, we will have also been able to update on any progress that has been made. But more importantly, we'll be able to talk about what projects are going forward. What are the things that we're going to bring forward to the township board? What's going to be incorporated into our capital improvement plan, and are there any things in either of those timeframes that we have missed or that we now need to look at. We know that this is the initial steps. By all means, do we think that it ends here? No. We know that this is the roadmap to get us into compliance. And if anybody knows anything about Canton Township, we have always prided ourselves on not just doing the bare minimums, but exceeding that. And I don't anticipate that we're going to take any different approach to this, but our number one priority is to become in compliance, which should be our priority. So once we do that, we can take a look at what we might do next. So as I said, it's a living document. It'll be our roadmap. It will lead us, hopefully, to have a township that becomes a community without barriers, and that's really, I think, our major goal here. So that is my recap of a 300-page document that attempted to, it came with a lot of hard work, so while it was a shorter presentation than all the time that's been invested, Brad, I know, it really came with a lot of thought, and there's a lot of details that go behind all the projects that we intend to do. So I guess I'd like to turn it over for anybody who has questions, and then we will tag team whoever on the staff might be able to answer those the best. Yes?
Okay. I'm not sure where to begin.
Okay.
Okay. There's no mic available for people down here?
Oh,
That's a good point for me.
That's a good
Point that
point.
out.
I am sorry about that. We do not have a,
We sat here in August of 2017. We had a very similar meeting. Okay? You asked those of us who were part of the community to provide our input at that point in time, and that we were being recruited for an ADA transition plan advisory committee. Now, that's 19 months ago. We have asked a number of times to the administration at this township when we were going to be included. We have not been yet. Okay? Why should I accept that you're going to include us now? That's number one.
okay.
Go ahead.
Oh, you wanted me to answer? I didn't know if you wanted to go through your answer. When we had that first meeting, we indicated that we were going to solicit input from the community. We did at that meeting. We incorporated the comments and the input that we received at that meeting. And I don't know that there's anything that we didn't incorporate when we had that meeting. And then we said that we were going to work on this transition plan and come back to the community, and we did. So we put the transition plan out there, and we've thought a lot about that. Do we do just an individual group, of selected group, or do we allow everybody to have that input? And when it came down to it, we felt it was more important to open it up to everybody. So we put the transition plan out there for the last 5 weeks to solicit input from anybody who might want to provide that input to us. And that was the method that we went about. And we've talked about it internally, and the intent is to do the same thing going forward, rather than limiting it to maybe
So basically,
8 people.
people who are handicapped are not going to be part of the process until you bring it back to the entire public. Is that the case?
I guess I'm not understanding what the concern is that,
If you really want to deal with the needs of handicapped people, you need to ask them what they might be. Let me put it that way.
and I think we've done that. At our meeting, we have requested that information, we have asked you, we've done surveys, we've asked for input on our transition plan, which detailed all of what we were incorporating.
Over a year and a half later.
It has taken us that long to put the plan in place in order for us to solicit input
Okay,
from
let me ask
anybody.
some other questions.
Okay.
Our new website,
Yes,
is that going to be usable by people who have visual disabilities?
yes.
And how will that work?
Eric, do you want to address that?
Right now, the site is combined.
Yeah, you might need to, you speak very softly.
Right now, our website provider that is doing the,
Use the mic.
Yeah, there you go.
right now, our website provider is going through the process of going through all of our pages, and they will be bringing them into the new site. They'll be going through all the content that's on our pages And they're telling us that they're going to make all the content accessible for the public. And once they release the site, it will be upon us, the content contributors that keep it up to date. We'll be going through additional training to keep the pages up. But if you have certain concerns about the pages coming forward, we need to know what issues you might be having with the website.
How does a blind person use them? That's
There
my
are-
question.
Well, with the websites, if you have, the different browsers have screen readers that
Screen
are
readers.
part of it. We are working on making them compliant with some of the screen readers out there.
Okay.
Yeah, so if you, and that's what I think I talked about a little bit earlier, some of our learning challenges were how you create that document so that it is not distracting when you actually have it on a screen reader. And we tested some of them, even the ADA transition plan. So if you put it on the screen reader, it would read it. And then we had one where someone had spaced instead of tabbed, and so it got stuck in this routine where it wouldn't move. And so lesson learned for us and an education for those preparing documents, that came up as something that we needed to start educating people on when we put those documents together. So we did test it with the screen reader, and we know that when that final one comes out on June 1st, that it should be ready to go.
I hope that's the case.
That's our intent, and that's why we've asked for, I've got a sign-up sheet here too, for anybody who wants to test it and work with.
Very specific in the plan that intersections would not be covered whatsoever.
What we were specific in the plan is that intersections are not our jurisdiction because we don't own those roads. But we do have cooperative partnerships. We know that we have passed a road millage. We know that there are projects that will take place and that we will have an integral part in. And from the point where we can remain involved in them and we're helping with those projects, whether it be through a financing option, that's where we have an opportunity to make some of those things happen. But we don't have the jurisdiction over them, so we can't mandate that Wayne County put something in. They themselves should be putting in because they have to come to the same requirements that we do. So they should be addressing
All
those.
right, if they're not going to do it, we don't need to worry about it.
What we're saying is if they aren't doing it, the best that we can do is to hold their feet to the fire if we're providing funding in any of those projects.
As well as that's worked on our road repair here in Canton Township.
I'm just saying we don't have the jurisdiction, so we can't do something on a road that we don't own.
Sidewalks are the responsibility of the township.
Yes, we've acknowledged that.
Everybody understands that. Okay, we repair 5 miles per year,
Mhm.
roughly. Okay, Erica, how many miles of sidewalk are there in the township? Well, you did indicate to me at one point around 5 miles, give or take. Okay, that means a 100-year plan to repair the sidewalks. The design life of a sidewalk is 20 years. You expect them to last 40. Okay, but either way, you're never going to get there.
I think that the assumption you're making is that every sidewalk fails. So we have 500 miles of sidewalk, they all fail at the same time. When we go out to do 5 miles worth, we're not going to take out the parts that are still good, we're going to repair what isn't. So that 5 miles may be may hit a lot more areas than
Certainly, but
maybe a particular
they're
subdivision.
not going to last 100 years. Just not
No,
gonna happen.
no. So if they're going to last 40 years, then we're not on a bad cycle.
I'm sorry, you're in a cycle of 100 years to replace them. They're going to all fail in 40 years. Many of them are that old now. How are you going to deal with this?
But I think when we go out to inspect them, we're inspecting 30 miles a year roughly. So when they do that 30 miles, they're putting the plans together on what needs to be repaired in that 30 miles. So if we have 100 miles or 500 miles, right, it's going to take us 15 years to have made all of them, 10 years? 10-year cycle to have evaluated all of them, to inspect, and then you put them on the repair plan, so.
Let me point out a few things. Okay. First of all, I've been.
And I'm gonna have
very
Erica
vocal
come
on
up
this,
here.
as Erica knows, and Erica has, in fact, we've had some sidewalks, repaired in my neighborhood, okay, in my area. And I appreciate that very much, and she's been very cooperative, and I'm glad for that. However, those sidewalk repairs aren't even close to ADA compliance at this point. Okay? I my neighborhood in a three-wheel, lever-operated, off-road wheelchair. And I got the sidewalks repaired to the point that I can get there now. And that's what I was after. I could not do it in a regular chair. Okay, if we're not going to inspect and bring into ADA compliance, then we're not even doing it. Do you understand my concern?
I've heard your concern, yes.
I'm going to stop this. Thank you.
Okay. Yes,
I have a question.
Okay.
I'm gonna speak with Jim. Housing being ADA compliant. If my mom's handicapped, she's in a wheelchair. My son's also special needs, autistic.
right.
And like we live right now across the Canton, she can't even get through the house to get to the kitchen in her wheelchair, or even get upstairs to take a shower. Like we have to do a bedside bath.
So I would anticipate there are resources for private individual homes as opposed to public facilities. So
Right.
this really focuses on the public
My
facilities.
mom's a veteran.
Mm-hmm.
And the VA was willing to come in, of course, the complex won't let her. Complex wasn't even up to code, even though Canton came in when they were starting to do the remodeling. But
So I'm not familiar with your specific instance, but I guess if we have if it was something that was done when it was building or constructed, I might have you talk to somebody in the building department. Rob Kramer is our building official. He might be able to provide some insight or some background as far as when it was constructed and whether it is constructed in compliance. I would leave up to him because I don't.
it's not
I don't.
like they should have some housing, some,
He would at least know what was built, how it was supposed to be built, when it was built, and whether or not the requirements were in place at the time it was constructed. Beyond helping within the home, there are probably resources that might be able to assist
right,
with
they
that.
won't let
But
us bring those resources in.
so then it's the challenge between who actually owns the property, right, and trying to get that to happen. So I would start, if you want to know if it was actually built in compliance, I would start with Rob, and he would be able to help you with that. Yes. Are some of the sidewalks responsible by the HOA? Oh, are they inspected by the homeowners association? No.
If they're a private development, and privately owned roads, their HOA should inspect them. If they don't, you may want to inquire as to if they plan to do that, so they at least make the sidewalks in your private site development usable and compliant.
But I see your feeling. And rebuild your own tower.
If they're rebuilding their sidewalks, they have to bring those into ADA compliance.
But they have none.
They haven't, is that what you're saying?
They have not all. But it never been much of over years now.
Oh, we're going for a couple of years.
If you're in an area where it's under active development and they still can't.
Oh.
If it's privately owned and you're in a HOA.
So that is, down, but
Right.
but the,
Yes, ma'am.
As a mom of an adult young man with disabilities, especially, I'm very concerned with if ADA has the responsibility for transportation of cars, people with disability, or senior citizens. But in the past, Accessibility transported people with disabilities to their work sites or to doctor's appointments and so forth in a range. They would then transfer over to trying to measure out, but it's been a nightmare because I've been told that they were not given the responsibilities and disabilities first, it was maybe for doctor's appointments and so forth. So my son has been left stranded many times trying to go to work and didn't even know they weren't coming, or they came an hour late. I'm just wondering where we stand for transportation for people with disabilities.
I don't know do you know, John, know the history?
Are you still having challenges with lateness and being delayed on pickups? Is that still happening?
It's still happening, not as often, but if there's a weather issue that maybe we don't know that there are people home sick, or there's a weather issue, there's no publication, I can go on to the site and introduce myself, saying I'm willing to come help you, set up a website where you can
Right.
say, or a voicemail that if something's happening, it gets published, everyone who's on
The list, right?
but that doesn't happen. And so there's been numerous times I work also, and I appreciate the ride, physically, it helps. But when there is no ride, and I'm at work and he can't get to work, his job is in jeopardy too, and he's getting a flack from his employer. I'm getting a flack from my employer, because then I leave to go get him. Or he's been stranded at work, and he can't get home. So I'm just wondering where we stand with that. I'm willing to help in any way, but I'm helpless. I don't know what to do.
No, I appreciate that. And the reason I asked if it was still happening, I know the first few months were very challenging.
Right.
There were a number of issues that they were working through as far as drivers go and hiring.
They didn't have enough staff,
They
they
didn't
didn't
have-
have a vehicle.
I think they picked up a lot more riders too, based on the numbers we had given them. So, but I haven't heard a lot of feedback from us since the first of the year, really, as far as some of and those were common occurrences, being late for pickups, people waiting for over an hour. So
And the
I thought,
answer I get when you call and say, they tell you to give you a 15-minute window, I understand that. And I understand things happen, traffic, accidents, I do understand all those things. But when you don't know,
Right.
there's nothing you can do. So my question is, why can't they establish a program where if something happens, at least notify the
Right.
person standing there waiting? You know, so that's, what can we do to help?
I'd love to chat with you afterward and get some specifics from you if I could, so I can follow up. We got really good responses from them. This is Michael Harris is here as well. We're both on the board with the transit as community representatives, so they've been very responsive. So I'd love to get a
Like I
couple.
said, I went to visit them and offer my help, anything I could do. I said to them, here's the problem we have, what can we do to help? But there was no feedback back.
Okay. I'm sorry to hear that. I know they utilized the phone system call outs, but that's prior to, and had other days when phones were canceled. They utilize their Facebook page, and I don't know that everybody has access to that as well, so certainly.
There's a lot of
Yeah,
issues.
there's a lot of people.
what, if you had a map,
Map system
excuse me,
for where the buses are.
of, just to have this information of the day,
Right, so you would know how far. So you're suggesting that if we have a map system that could track the buses, right? Am I getting that correct?
and if just to have the different times, the day on,
Yeah, so something, yeah, it would say delayed or whatever the situation is.
Right, but then that gets to the point of the people that don't have cell phones or don't have computers or tablets. You know,
how many people just have
I'm sure some people don't.
on there?
What does our world come to, right? Yes, Anne Marie.
I want to say a couple of things. Thank you very much for doing this. I know it's a lot of work. But I do have to say that when you read the minutes at the end of the plan that's on the site, and it does say that a committee was supposed to be established, and a lot of these people signed up for it. So I think the process fell short there. When you look at your dates, in terms of what's going to happen when, I suggest that maybe we do have a committee of some of the people that are here, because they did put stars next to their name. Read the notes at the end of your report, you can see
No, we understood that. Mhm.
So I would suggest that you do that. Another couple of things, so one of the board goals is that we have a walkable, livable community, and that means access for everybody. And I know that some of the national targets, which we're also striving for, is that people can walk to parks within 10 minutes of their house. That also means accessibility. So this all has to go hand in hand, like you're doing with the sidewalks, you have to do it with the others. Also, some of our, just driving here, I noticed some of our crosswalks, they're faded, they're gone on the major highways. I see kids trying to go across, people trying to go across. I know those are state and county roads, but they're within our walls. And we really need to help communicate that to the state and county. Hey, get over here and fix these crosswalks. Make them predominantly viewable so people can see them. I mean, they're faded, you can't even see them. And cars are looking one way, and they're not paying attention to somebody coming across because those crosswalks are there. But when you're disabled, it's even more dangerous because you can't get across that road. In terms of transportation, I mean, we're pushing to make that, we just added a half an hour on our schedule. Like we went from 5 to 5:30 for seniors and disabled, which is good, however, it's not good enough. And the reason it's not is because we have people here who would like to come to do things like this, but they can't because we don't have a shuttle at this time. And I've heard that over and over again. And so that really needs to be part of the plan too. I know, and that's something that goes hand in hand with what we're doing. So a lot of these things are linked together. So we really need some stretch goals. I mean, like extending transportation hours, communicating to the state and the county that these crosswalks are not safe because the lines are gone. Also getting more input from the people in terms of committee, a face-to-face committee, like we said. But I mean, there's still a lot of work. So those dates, I'm glad we have dates, but I think they're a little bit too soon based on some things that might still be missing, and I think some input that people might not have here in the board.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions?
I have
Yes.
one more comment. Much of the cost involved in the transition plan has to do with additional handicap parking and at various sites around the community, and I understand that. But as long as we as a community are not going to police them, are not going to ticket violators, it doesn't make any difference. You can put all the handicap parking you want, but if you're not going to do anything about it, it doesn't matter. Okay, I've only been shut out of handicap parking twice this week. It's Thursday. And that's a regular thing for people who have these problems. Okay, and there's nothing you can do. The township is not going to police it. You need to call them, they need to get there, and if they have nothing else to do, and that's the words of that's it. Not going to happen.
I know that concern was brought to him, and I thought we would have someone from ordinance here tonight, but they're not. And he knows that that's the only way that gets corrected is having an ordinance enforcement person out there, but I think
No,
that
that's
there's
not true.
limited
I mean, other
resources
communities are
too.
doing it very effectively, okay, that does not require ordinance enforcement. And I've talked to Pat about that, and he's against it, period.
Whichever way it goes, it's still enforcing an ordinance. It doesn't, the mechanism in which it gets enforced, I think there are potentially options for that, but what I'm saying is it is a matter of ordinance enforcement, so that's the only way it gets solved if somebody actually addresses it.
And I agree with that, but it doesn't have to be a cost to the township.
Okay. Any other questions? Yes.
How would you think that?
I'm sorry?
He wants to know how you would fix that.
Oh, there's a couple of, the big one is what's going on in Grand Rapids right now, is that citizens are invited to take pictures of people parking in handicap spots who do not have the license plate or the placards, sending it to the police, and they get ticketed. And it's cut way back on their lack of parking. And so it can be done.
Yeah,
in
there's
this
a
state.
advantage of technology to help solve that issue.
No, what do you think? It's up to the people, not that job.
Saying that it's up to the people to address it.
Yeah. What
It's an
do you-
alternative. I think that's what he's saying, is that it doesn't, he's suggesting that there are places that have made it work by not using paid resources by the township, for lack of a better term. Right.
I understand what you said, but it's not that, so it's not biblical, it's not universal.
Right. Yes, Robin.
Hi.
Hi.
I love all the public input, and advocates. And I would say that, I would just reiterate, take advantage of all the people who experience this life and the spirit of this law. Take advantage of us, because we can speak into what is best practices better than people who know all the laws and what the code is supposed to be, but don't experience life from this seat or from this experience. So, just take advantage of it. And I appreciate that you shared all the laws about compliance and about the ADA and Title II. But also, just remember, there's also a spirit to the ADA and a philosophy of independent living. Sorry, I'm
You're doing good.
losing my breath. There's a spirit to this law, to independent living, and these people want to be a part of it, and nothing for us without us,
Right.
So let us be a part of building something good that is truly barrier-free and that supports the spirit of this law. Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else? Yes.
So is there a possibility that you could get together with some of these community members before you present it to the board?
We can modify the schedule too to accommodate that. Yes. Anybody else? Okay, seeing none, thank you all for being here. I appreciate your input and appreciate you taking the time to be here tonight and to give us your feedback. And I think, Robin, you summed it up very well, and I appreciate your words. So if we don't have anybody else, I do have a sign-up sheet for anybody who is interested on the website. That would be helpful as well. As I said, Kristen Thomas will be the one spearheading that, so she will contact people. So I will leave that over here for anybody who would like to sign up for that as well. All right. Thank you all for coming.
I'm aware of tornado siren drills, but it's not working for me. It is just that I am concerned about my being alone and unaware of the coming of a tornado while inside of my home, when my husband may not be at home. So,
Okay, I can answer that. And I think, first of all, if you would make sure that you've signed in, and I know, are you, okay, ready? So the first thing would be is for us to make sure that we have identified her with her contact information over here. Part of this plan is to include emergency preparedness so that we are able to deliver those services throughout our community for those with disabilities. So that is on our plan. That plan has not been totally developed. So we can put you in touch with the resource who is developing that plan and make sure that he can hear the concerns and knows how to incorporate those when the plan is developed. Does that answer it? Okay, thank you. Thank you.
Green, isn't that also, it's gonna take the input of the person that's having the difficulty
Right.
And they may have to get something that provides either flashing lights or vibrating bed to let them
Yes,
know.
flashing lights.
Something like that, but they have to give the person preparing the emergency plan for residents that have disabilities. We don't know everybody in the community that may have that problem.
So as he prepares that plan, that's why I want to make sure that we've identified you in the contacts so that we can get you in touch with him, and that way we can make sure that that's addressed in the plan. Make sense? Okay.
Were there any other comments on the website that you noticed that we didn't talk about?
Comments from the website or that people had submitted on the website? Anything that was submitted prior to tonight was incorporated in the presentation. So I tried to make sure that I hit on all of the items that had come through. So I didn't not include somebody's, but yeah, so most of them were already included. Most often it comes to signalized intersections but mostly sidewalks were the main things. So. All right. Well, thank you again.